Let's just jump back to the war in Ukraine, and I'm picking up here, you had a sneak preview, the BBC simply no longer reporting because life's too difficult. So no BBC Ukraine reports for 3 days. That was what I saw early this morning. Basically, the fact there is a Russian offensive in Ukraine, that simply vanished from BBC reporting, and they're not talking about it at all. And this one I thought was significant, that basically Ukrainian corruption, which has stopped them getting into NATO apparently, that's disappeared, but it's become Russian corruption now as far as the BBC is concerned. Now, I decided just to focus in on this gentleman that a lot of the mainstream media has used to comment on matters to do with conflict, whether it's in Syria, Iraq, or around the world. Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, former military man, supposedly specialising in nuclear and biological weapons, but he's often quoted, and this was what he was posting in the Eye on July the 19th. He said that Sir Keir Starmer and his new team have an opportunity to write the history books in favour of democracy, decency and peace. Well, I thought that was pretty unlikely, because it's quite clear that the new government is already full into driving the war onwards, and we get a glimpse of it here with Sir Keir Starmer standing in the background alongside a very puffed up Zelenskyy, as we're signed into a defence industrial support treaty with Ukraine. Remember that this is the country that has been described as being so corrupt that it can't enter into NATO. But it's apparently okay that UK is signed into deals with this corrupt country and the corrupt leadership. So can we trust Starmer? I think he's just completely laughing at the public. And let's follow on through the segment of this gentleman talking. So he said this: we do not need a bunch of academics to tell the government our army is too small and we have the wrong type of kit to fight the Russians in Europe. Well, we don't really have any kit, but he went on to say this: the mistake the Nazis made in the Second World War was to rely on technology over mass, and we are in danger of repeating the same mistake now. I thought this was just an incredible statement, Mike, because, of course, the Nazis poured in millions of troops into Eastern Europe. And yes, some of their tanks suffered from technology flaws, but is he really saying that we will only get it right if we follow the Nazi line and pour into Ukraine? So I'm going to questioning him over this, and I think the real issue was the Nazis got it wrong by invading Russia, which is what I think Mr. Or Hamish and his team seem to want to do, or to get the government to do at least. He says that for sure we need precision-guided long-range everything, but we need soldiers to take and hold ground. And at the moment we have neither in sufficient quantities to hold the Russian hordes. Note the language. This is just like reading documentation about the Wehrmacht's attack in Eastern Europe, and apparently we're supposed to be following exactly the same line. It's just quite incredible. Let's give you a little bit more. The UK Ministry of Defence stated last Friday that Russian forces had lost 70,000 men in the last 2 months at the rate of 1,000 a day. And this was likely to continue throughout their summer offensive. Well, there's a Russian summer offensive carrying on at the moment. Whether those losses are correct, I very much doubt it. But listen to, or let's read his next statement here, where he says that Russian forces have gone static. So there's an offensive, but according to him, it's now static because there's little else that they can do. And Putin has said he wants a ceasefire with the current battle lines respected. So I'm just going to put over this: static. Is that really the case, Hamish? Because on the battlefront, what is happening is what I have always described as a lava flow attack. The Russians are continually moving forward, hundreds of meters in the built-up areas, often for maybe weeks or months until they take that particular built-up area. But in the more open territory, advances of 1, 2, 3, 4 kilometers, which doesn't sound a lot until this is repeated over days and weeks. and that is how the Russian offensive is moving forward. But if we look at a bit more information here, this is the Kyiv Independent, which I noticed had an article about the loss of Russian troops, and this was the figure, 566,710. I'm just going to talk through this a bit because nobody at the moment has the irrefutable evidence of what losses are. But the important thing is the West isn't talking about Ukraine's casualties at all. But if we say that the Ukraine statement of the Russian casualty figures are correct, at a ratio of 3 wounded per 1 dead, Russia has a casualty rates of about 141,000 killed and 425,000 wounded, and this is obviously a huge number of men. Thank you, Mike. But the other thing we've got to remember is that the Ukraine has consistently been outgunned in the whole of this combat, the whole of the war going on in Ukraine, by Russian artillery, airstrikes, the missile strikes, and in recent months by the precision-launched 500, 1,500, and 3,000 kilogram bombs. Why am I talking about this? Because, of course, the evidence suggests that it's going to be the Ukrainians that are taking the higher casualties. And if we just move on through this simple analysis, this is something which should never be forgotten. The BBC doesn't want to talk about it, the UK Ministry of Defence, but the reality is on the battlefield, Ukraine is going to suffer the higher casualties. And if we take that at a 3-to-1 ratio, then we would be saying at the moment that Ukraine had lost about 425,000 men and some women killed, and would have about 1.2 million injured. Now those latter figures look high, but the thing we should remember is that Ukraine has already lost 2 armies, we're going to say of roughly 200,000, and its losses are so high at the moment, it's unable to recruit sufficient troops to sustain losses in a 3rd army. So we cannot give the irrefutable evidence of what these losses are, but it is quite obvious that what we're being told about losses on the Ukrainian side are simply not credible, or we've got to get over the silence. And Mike, I'm just going to say, the more I get into this, the more horrific it is that we've got Starmer now as a Labour politician who simply wants to keep the war going. And the fact is that the casualties now for the Ukrainians so high that they've got to continue these conscription groups lifting people off the streets. But there is some pushback because over recent weeks, Ukrainians have been burning the cars of the conscription groups. So the teams, the men and women who are part of the official government conscription teams, are leaving their vehicles outside in car parks outside their flats or their homes, wherever they live. And now Ukrainians are setting fire to those cars in protest at the ongoing conscription. So brutal and unbelievably bloody. And Keir Starmer signing us into an agreement with Zelenskyy, who still officially should not be in post as president, under the laws and statutes of Ukraine.
Well, I'm hearing that in Poland, they're starting to look to grab Ukrainian men that have left Ukraine and are living in Poland at the moment and start them on training schemes for being shipped back to Ukraine slowly. But, the comment I would make on this, Brian, is I'm just staggered that no matter what side of the argument you might feel that you're on with respect to Ukraine and Russia or with respect to Israel and Gaza, just the sheer quantity of bloodletting that's going on with absolute silence from the majority of people it's beyond my comprehension. I can't work out where has the empathy gone. That's the bit that I can't quite get to grips with at the moment.
It's disappeared. Ben, perhaps we could just look to you on this one, because as you can tell, Mike and I have got to the point where we're reading and describing some of the news happening around where words simply fail you. There appear to be no politicians, well, one or two of them are standing up and challenging the bloodshed, but otherwise it appears that our political leaders in the West simply want war, war, and more war.
Absolutely. Well, yes, it does make you wonder what hold Zelensky and Ukraine have over these people, right? I mean, because it's not just loyalty to the cause, is it? I mean, there's something else going on behind the scenes. I also think that a phenomenal propaganda job has been done, particularly on the younger generations, portraying Putin as a vicious dictator who is universally wrong in this situation, and the Ukrainians as innocent freedom fighters trying to extract themselves from tyrannical rule from overseas. And there doesn't seem to be any nuance in this at all, right? And this was true at the start. And concerningly, it doesn't seem to have abated much over the past 2 years, actually. And that's the thing that I think you guys have actually just touched on, right? Is that despite this industrialized slaughter happening at the behest of our political masters, the everyday people on the street just seem completely immune to or detached from the realities of what's happening in their name, essentially.
Yeah.
Well, it's happening in their name at the moment, Ben, but if the national service / conscription policy continues, which there's no reason to believe it isn't, it may only be a few months or years before we start seeing British people heading in the same direction.
Yeah, this is true.